The year was 1845, and Britain stood at the height of its power. The Royal Navy had conquered seas, toppled empires, and stretched the empire's reach to the ends of the earth. Yet one challenge remained: the elusive Northwest Passage, a frozen shortcut through the Arctic that promised wealth, dominance, and eternal glory to the men who found it. At the center of this grand ambition was Sir John Franklin, a seasoned officer whose name carried both prestige and controversy. Though he was 60 years old, worn from past expeditions, the Admiralty entrusted him with command. They gave him not one, but two of the most advanced ships of their time, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Reinforced with iron plating, outfitted with steam engines, and stocked with years' worth of provisions, they were considered unstoppable, floating fortresses designed to defy even the merciless Arctic. On a bright May morning, the ships departed from Greenhithe, their black hulls cutting through the Thames as crowds gathered to cheer. Families waved, bands played, and newspapers hailed the voyage as destiny itself. To onlookers, the expedition was a triumph waiting to be written, a story of British courage marching into the unknown. But beneath the fanfare, not all was celebratory. Among the crew, 129 men in total, some whispered of unease. One sailor spoke of a strange omen, a raven that had followed the ships from port, circling overhead like a shadow. Superstitious murmurs spread across the decks. To most, it was nonsense, the silly talk of men too long at sea. But for a few, the omen clung to them like a chill they could not shake. The ships pushed into the horizon, carrying the pride of an empire and a secret darkness that no one yet dared to name. Twist, a sailor, watching the raven vanish into the clouds, muttered under his breath, "It will follow us to the end." Into the white silence. After leaving England's familiar shores, the two great ships pressed ever northward, into waters fewer men had dared to sail. At first, the voyage was marked by routine, charts drawn, songs sung, and the confident rhythm of daily drills. But soon, the vastness of the Arctic began to swallow them. The world grew quieter with each passing day. Ice replaced the rolling swells of the Atlantic, and a blinding, endless whiteness stretched in every direction. Sunlight lingered strangely, casting long shadows that never seemed to move. The crew marveled at the alien beauty, but unease simmered beneath their awe. For all the power of Erebus and Terror, nature remained indifferent. By the winter of 1846, the ice closed in around the ships, clutching their iron hulls like a vice. The men expected it. Every Arctic expedition endured periods of entrapment, but this time, the silence was heavier. No thaw came. The ships drifted, frozen in place, at the mercy of the winds and currents. Back in Britain, months turned into years. Families awaited letters that never came. The Admiralty, confident in Franklin's skill, delayed raising alarm. Yet rumors spread of starvation, of disaster, of a silence too deep to ignore. Search parties were finally dispatched, combing the Arctic wastes, but they found only endless plains of snow and ice stretching to the horizon like a desert carved in white stone. Still, there were whispers. A whaler, returning from Baffin Bay, reported a strange sight, flickering lights dancing in the sky where Franklin's ships had last been seen. At first, they seemed like the northern auroras, but the crew swore the lights pulsed in patterns as though signaling. Others claimed they were not lights at all, but lanterns, moving across the ice as if carried by invisible hands. The Admiralty dismissed such tales as superstition. Yet for those who had seen the strange glow, one thought lingered in their minds. Perhaps Franklin's men were still alive and trying to send a message through the silence of the Arctic night. Twist, the whaler, added one final detail, his voice shaking. The lights, they weren't in the sky. They were on the ice. And they moved. The first clues of doom. Years passed with no word from Franklin or his men. Britain, once confident, now grew desperate. Dozens of search expeditions were launched, each braving the merciless Arctic. Some returned broken and frostbitten, others vanished, adding new names to the long list of the lost. Then, at last, fragments began to surface. On desolate King William Island, searchers stumbled upon abandoned campsites, tattered clothing, and scattered relics. A boot half buried in snow, a spoon stamped with an officer's initials, scraps of journals written in trembling hands. The ink was faded, the words broken by frostbite and exhaustion, but their tone was unmistakable: despair. And yet, for all these clues, one thing was missing: the men themselves. No bodies lay with the relics. No graves marked the frozen soil. It was as though the earth had swallowed them whole. The mystery deepened when Inuit hunters came forward with stories passed among their people. They told of strange encounters, of pale, starving men dragging themselves across the ice, their eyes sunken, their movements slow, as if life itself was leaving them. The Inuit offered them food, but the men seemed haunted, glancing over their shoulders into empty space. One elder described it with chilling precision. They walked as if shadows chased them. We saw nothing, but they did. Their fear was not of hunger. It was of something we could not see. The rescuers dismissed these accounts as superstition, but the detail lingered like frostbite in the mind. What had Franklin's men seen in the endless white? Twist. When asked to guide the searchers, an Inuit hunter refused, saying softly, "The men you seek are not alone. The shadows still walk with them." The testimony of the elders. When European searchers pressed deeper into the Arctic, they turned to the Inuit, whose knowledge of the land far surpassed their own. What they heard was not merely directions, but stories, chilling fragments of the fate that had overtaken Franklin's men. According to Inuit oral tradition, the great ships became prisoners of the ice. They did not move for seasons at a time, locked in white walls that creaked and groaned like living things. The men, once proud and strong, began to weaken. Hunger hollowed them. Cold stiffened their hands until even lifting food became a battle. Some were seen wandering across the ice, gaunt and desperate, dragging sledges heavy with supplies. Yet their faces were not only starving, they were terrified. The Inuit recalled whispers passed from elder to elder that the strangers were being watched. They flinched at unseen movement, spoke to things that were not there, and huddled together at night, as if something circled just beyond the glow of their lanterns. When asked what haunted them, the Inuit elders gave a single name: Tornrarsuk. In their traditions, Tornrarsuk was no ordinary spirit, but a guardian of the north, a being who punished intruders, devouring not just flesh but the very soul of those who trespassed. One elder described how the Franklin men began to act strangely, as if Tornrarsuk's shadow had fallen over them. They were not men anymore, he said. They had the shape of men, but their eyes looked past you, into the dark. They were already being taken. To the British rescuers, these tales were dismissed as myth. But among the Inuit, the warning was clear. The land itself had judged Franklin's expedition and found them wanting. Twist, an elder, staring into the firelight, gave his final warning. The ships are not lost. They are kept. Tornrarsuk holds them still. Madness on the ice. The Arctic does not forgive weakness. Trapped in ice and isolated from the world, the men of Erebus and terror slowly unraveled. Frostbite stole their fingers. Hunger hollowed their bellies. But it was not only the cold and starvation that consumed them. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at the mind. Forensic examinations of their remains would later reveal the unthinkable: evidence of cannibalism. Britain's authorities struggled to accept the truth, clinging to notions of honor and duty. Yet the bones told a story of desperation beyond comprehension. Men forced to consume the flesh of their fallen comrades to survive. But among the remains, there were signs that suggested something stranger still. Some bones bore not only the marks of butchery, but ritual carvings, intricate and deliberate, etched as though the men were offering sacrifices. Could it be delirium born of hunger? Or had they turned to some ancient, primal rite, a misguided attempt to appease forces that stalked them across the ice? Letters and scraps of journals describe hallucinations, whispers carried by the wind, and shadows moving just beyond the periphery of vision. Officers who once commanded respect became incoherent, pacing the decks in circles, muttering to unseen presences. The ice, unyielding and silent, seemed almost alive, pressing against the hulls, echoing back their fear. One sailor wrote of seeing figures standing on the ice at night, silent and still, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Another reported hearing voices calling his name, though no one was there. Madness spread faster than frostbite. infecting the strongest minds, leaving behind a crew broken in body and soul. Twist: the Inuit would later recall seeing these men wandering in the distance, talking to shadows. They were eating one another, an elder said. But it was not hunger that drove them. It was the spirit, the cursed relics. As decades passed, fragments of Franklin's expedition began to resurface, preserved in ice and snow like frozen whispers of a vanished world. Among the scattered remains were artifacts: a Bible with frost-rimmed pages, silver spoons engraved with officers' initials, and personal belongings remarkably intact despite the Arctic's merciless grip. But those who handled these relics reported that they were more than mere objects. They seemed to carry a presence, a lingering shadow of the men who once clung to them. Explorers and researchers who touched the silverware or opened the journals often fell into unexplainable nightmares, waking to visions of spectral figures staring through the frozen haze, their eyes dark and accusing. Some complained of sudden illnesses, fevers, chills, inexplicable bruises, and a creeping sense of dread that could not be rationalized. Even the most skeptical felt the weight of something unseen. An explorer who brought home Franklin's medal described hearing whispers at night, soft words carried on the wind, uttered in a language he could not understand. Within weeks, he met a freak and sudden death, falling from a staircase in what was deemed an accident. Yet those who knew him swore he had been haunted by the artifact in the days leading up to his demise. The Inuit, long keepers of Arctic knowledge, had warned of this phenomenon. To disturb the frozen remains of the expedition was to stir the anger of Tornrarsuk, the spirit guardian. The relics, no matter how mundane they seemed, were said to be conduits, fragments of men caught between life and death, still tethered to the ice and the spirit that claimed them. Twist: one researcher confided, shivering, "The ice is not empty. It watches. It waits. Every relic we touch feels like a heartbeat, not ours, but theirs." The poison within. Years of frozen silence finally yielded answers, at least partially. Modern forensic analysis revealed that the men of Franklin's expedition had been slowly poisoned. Lead levels in their bones and remains were extraordinarily high, traced to poorly soldered food tins and water pipes aboard the ships. The science was clear. Prolonged exposure to lead could cause hallucinations, paranoia, violent behavior, and ultimately, death. Yet while researchers considered their findings conclusive, the Arctic seemed to whisper a different truth. Inuit accounts told a story that could not be explained by science alone. They described men whose eyes turned black before death, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if some invisible force had seized their minds. Officers and sailors reportedly muttered to unseen figures, pacing in the snow like puppets on a string. It was a collision of two worlds, one of reason, the other of myth. Let explain the madness, yet it did not explain the whispers in the ice, the shadows stalking the camps, or the desperate men who begged invisible forces for mercy. Some historians argued that the poisoning, combined with starvation and exposure, was enough to destroy a crew. But the Inuit insisted that Tornrarsuk's presence had driven them beyond the brink, that the lead may have weakened their bodies, but the spirit had preyed on their souls. The line between science and superstition blurred. Even the most rational minds could not deny the creeping sensation that something alive lingered in the frozen expanse, waiting, watching, and feeding on the fear of the doomed men. Twist: one elder whispered to a researcher. Poison took their bodies, but something else took their hearts. The spirit of the North. Long before Franklin's ships vanished into the Arctic ice, the Inuit had known the land as sacred and alive. The frozen expanse was not empty. It was a place of spirits and guardians, ancient entities that punished trespassers and protected the balance of life in the harshest of landscapes. Among these entities, one name carried a weight that even the elders dared not speak lightly: Tornrarsuk. According to legend, Tornrarsuk was a vigilant and wrathful guardian, a spirit that devoured not flesh alone, but the souls of those who dared disturb the land's frozen sanctity. To cross the ice without respect was to invite its gaze, and once noticed, there was no turning back. Inuit stories painted a chilling picture of Franklin's men, pale, gaunt, stumbling across the endless snow, their eyes wide with terror, muttering to shadows that no human could see. The elders recounted how the spirit stalked them, invisible but relentless, bending the cold and the wind to its will. Sledges would vanish, tents collapse without reason, and lanterns flickered with an unnatural chill. What unnerved the rescuers and later historians was the accuracy of these tales. Long before the wrecks were discovered in the 21st century, Inuit maps and oral histories pointed to the exact resting places of Erebus and Terror, locations impossible to determine without knowledge of the ship's final movements. Yet the elders refused to guide outsiders, warning, "To find them is to wake the guardian." And Tornrarsuk does not forgive. Even the most skeptical explorers began to feel it, a presence in the stillness of the ice, a weight pressing down from the sky, a silence that was more than absence. It was attention. The Arctic itself seemed to pulse with a life older than the men who had sought to conquer it. Twist. One elder, eyes dark and unblinking, leaned close and murmured, "The ice remembers." And Tornrarsuk waits, always. The ghost ships rise again. Nearly 2 centuries after Franklin's disappearance, the Arctic finally revealed some of its secrets. In 2014 and 2016, the wrecks of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were discovered, resting in icy graves, astonishingly preserved. Their iron hulls, once thought lost forever, lay beneath the Arctic waters, silent witnesses to the tragedy that had consumed their crews. Divers and researchers approached with awe and apprehension. The water was clear but frigid, pressing down on them like an invisible hand. Holes encrusted with ice and marine growth seemed almost alive, as if the ships themselves had absorbed the fear, madness, and desperation of the men who had perished aboard them. Inside, the scenes were unsettling. Personal effects lay untouched, journals, navigation instruments, and tattered uniforms frozen in time. Yet it was not the preservation that unnerved the divers. It was the feeling of being watched, fleeting shadows at the edges of their vision, strange knocks echoing through metal corridors, and radios that whispered static, broken syllables, or faint voices that seemed to call the explorers' names. Footage from cameras occasionally cut out for no apparent reason. When investigators approached the captain's cabin, the heart of the ship's command, screens flickered to black and equipment malfunctioned. Some whispered that whatever haunted the wrecks was not merely the echo of past lives, but a force still present, jealous of intrusion, unwilling to be seen. The Inuit had long predicted this. According to oral histories, the ships rested where Tornrarsuk had left them, preserved by the spirit itself. Disturbing them would awaken the same malevolence that had driven Franklin's men to madness and death. And now, it seemed, the warning was real. Twist. One diver surfaced pale and trembling, muttering, "It knows we are here, and it is not pleased." The curse never sleeps. Even today, the Franklin expedition remains one of history's most haunting mysteries. The wrecks of Erebus and Terror lie preserved in the Arctic ice, silent, yet speaking volumes of the crew's tragic fate. Historians point to starvation, lead poisoning, and the merciless cold as causes of death. Science offers explanations, but they never feel complete, never account for the whispers in the wind, the shadows moving across endless ice, or the stories that refuse to die. The Inuit elders still tell the tales with reverence and fear. They warn that the curse that claimed Franklin's men is not finished. The Arctic keeps its own time. It does not forgive. Tornrarsuk, the spirit guardian, remains vigilant. To disturb the ships, to touch the relics, is to risk awakening the same malevolence that drove an entire crew to madness. In the 21st century, unexplained phenomena continue to echo these warnings. Divers report fleeting figures in the periphery, radios crackle with ghostly static, and recent measurements near the wrecks reveal mysterious radio anomalies, patterns that eerily match Inuit accounts of voices carried on the wind. The ice, it seems, is still alive with memory, still holding the souls of the lost. No one can say for certain what truly happened, and perhaps no one ever will. The Arctic conceals its secrets beneath layers of ice and snow, preserved in stillness, while the spirits wait, watching and calling. Final twist. One radio operator, monitoring the wreck sites, whispered in disbelief, "They're speaking, and I think they know I'm listening."